Hello everybody, I hope you are doing well. Today we are going to discuss why the US is going to strike Venezuela, why the US is preparing to strike Venezuela. As of right now, the US is already in an armed conflict with the narco-terrorist state of Venezuela, the so-called narco-terrorist state of Venezuela. This is what the US calls the narco-terrorist state of Venezuela. Why is the US trying to strike Venezuela? Why is the US building up its forces in the Caribbean Sea around Venezuela? As of right now, 14,000 US troops are in the seas around Venezuela. More than a dozen ships are there. The most advanced aircraft carrier of the US, which is the USS Gerald R, is also present there. And US has also stationed a submarine there, which is nuclear capable. So all of these things are happening in real time, and we are seeing that the Donald Trump administration has already told all the airlines and the pirates and the drug traffickers and the cartels that the airspace over Venezuela is closed for everybody. So this closure of airspace shows that that tensions have increased to a large extent, that the US is preparing to strike Venezuela in real time. But why? What are the official reasons that the US is preparing to strike Venezuela? So the first and the most important reason, the official reason, is that the US wants to combat narco terrorism, what it calls the narco terrorism. On November 24, 2025, the US officially designated the Cartel de los Celos, which is the Cartel of the Suns, as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, this Cartel de las Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, is essentially the name that the Venezuelan people gave to those generals in the army, to those people in the state of Venezuela, in the government of Venezuela during the 1990s, who were responsible, who were who were who were responsible for taking money from drug cartels or from selling drugs. So this was an sort of an unofficial designation that the people gave to the generals in the army for indulging themselves in narcotics, in the trade of narcotics. So this is essentially not a cartel per se, as it is called, but it is a generic term that has been used by the US government now as well, to term all of these people who are involved in narco terrorism, in smuggling narcotics from the southern border into the US, as a cartel. And the US has designated it as a terrorist organization. And the the US government contends that the Cartel de las Solas is being led by the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro and his top military generals. So this legal distinction, that Cartel de las Solas is a terrorist organization, that gives the US military a legal cover to strike military targets, to strike those targets which they think are involved in narco terrorism, in narco smuggling into the US. So the essential point is that the US wants to stop drug trafficking from the southern border into the US, from the southern countries, from the countries of Latin America, into the US, especially cocaine, fentanyl, and all of these other opioids which are wreaking a havoc across the US. In addition, the US government also blames Venezuela for the migrant crisis, for all these people which are coming through the southern border illegally. And as according to Donald Trump, these illegal people who are here in the US, they cause all of these they are the source of all of these crimes, and they are the source of unemployment for the local people, because they take up these jobs at lower wages and all that. So this crisis of migration, this migrant crisis, that is the US contends that this migrant crisis is also being caused by Venezuela, and the Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, who leads a socialist sort of a country, is responsible for all of this. But there are some underlying causes for all of this as well. Number one underlying cause for this escalation and tension is that the US wants Nicolas Maduro to go. The US doesn't like Nicolas Maduro. The elections of 2018 and 2024 were disputed, and the US blames Nicolas Maduro for aggravating the situation of smuggling of these narcotics into the US, of this migrant crisis. That's why the US wants Nicolas Maduro to go. That's why the US wants to change the regime in Venezuela. Moreover, the US also wants to re-establish its influence in the Western Hemisphere, which it considers its own sphere of influence. According to the Monroe Doctrine, this is essentially a revitalization of the Monroe Doctrine, that this is US's sphere of influence, and everything in this region, in this hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, is going to happen according to the wills and whims and wishes of the United States government. And Russia, China, and Iran, all of these countries which are adversaries of the US, are not going to have anything to do with the countries which are in the Western Hemisphere. For example, if Venezuela is going to sell oil to Iran, or China, this is essentially against the interests of the United States. So the United States wouldn't want Venezuela to have anything to do with Iran, Russia, or China, in the same way that it didn't want Cuba to have anything with Russia to do with Russia back in the day. So the US wants to reestablish its influence in the region as well. One of the most important reasons that the US wants to control the regime in Venezuela is because of the fact that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, which have been proven. More than 303 billion barrels of oil are present in Venezuela as of 2023. So, and the US is also a huge economy which depends on oil, which needs oil. So these oil reserves which Venezuela has, they make Venezuela a very a very prime piece of real estate, a very prime piece of land that must be under the control of the US if it wants to have energy security in case global energy markets are disrupted due to some reason, in case Suez Canal is shut down, in case Persian Gulf is shut down, the Strait of Hormuz is shut down. So in that case, the US would definitely want to have all of these oil reserves, access to all of these energy resources intact. Why? Because if push comes to a shove, if the US enters into a war with China or Russia, then the US would definitely want to have all of these energy resources available to itself. And having the largest oil reserves in the world, Venezuela becomes a prime target for those who would want to have or control the most what should I call, valuable real estate in the world. So in that sense, these energy resources make Venezuela a target for all of these oil giants, for all of these, like the geopolitics then starts to revolve around Venezuela. And we have seen that it has been revolving around Venezuela for a long time, especially in the Western Hemisphere. Then also after 1999, when Hugo Chavez took over Venezuela as its president, he initiated all of these reforms in which he wanted to establish a socialist government where social safety was provided to the people. And all of these reforms, although he couldn't sustain those reforms, although the revenues from oil dropped and all that, he couldn't succeed in his agenda. But having a socialist government does not sit well with the establishment of the US, the military and civilian and the intellectual establishment and the political establishment of the US, because the US traditionally has a capitalistic mindset. The people in the US have a capitalist mindset. They tend to get a bit cautious and wary when somebody says these words about socialism, about democratic socialism, as we have seen with Mamdani when he was running his campaign of democratic socialism and affordability, and everybody was like, hey, he's a communist. Donald Trump would call him a communist. So the people in the US, especially the people who control state resources, they are wary of any socialist experiments inside the US as well as in the sphere of influence of the US. So taking a hardline stance against a socialist government at the doorstep of the US or in the sphere of influence of US, sits well with the MAGA base maybe of the US President Donald Trump, who wants to re-establish American hegemony, American supremacy in the region and beyond. So there are multiple reasons that the US would want to go to war with Venezuela, and to would want to Venezuela to kneel before the US government, which Nicolas Maduro is not doing as far as the situation has developed so far. But according to New York Times, there was a call between the US President Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro this last week, and maybe this is the maximum pressure campaign by the US President to bring Maduro to heel. He wants him to kneel before him, so that maybe they can strike a deal on the Venezuelan oil reserves, on the migrant crisis, on the fentanyl crisis, on the narcotics crisis, on this crisis of drugs and cocaine and fentanyl and all of these opioids which are coming through the southern border. The US has already carried out 21 airstrikes in the seas in and around Venezuela, which have killed more than 80 people. And according to the US government, these boats which were targeted in these strikes, these boats were carrying drugs into the US. These were the smugglers of drugs, and the US Army, the US Air Force, they struck the US Navy, they struck those targets, and they killed all those people. So and this is essentially an escalation of that targeting campaign. Previously it was just in the sea, but now the US President Donald Trump announced on Thursday that he's now going to give these orders to US Navy that they start striking targets on Venezuelan mainland, where all of these drugs they are produced, and they are packaged and packed, and then they are transported. So maybe they are going to strike at the heart of at the production centers of all of these cartels. Let's see how this turns out. Let's see if the US is going to go to war with Venezuela over this narco terrorism, over this migration crisis, over this over these oil reserves. Who knows? But this is the latest, and let's see how the situation unfolds. I hope you like this analysis. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll bring you more. Take care.